This weekend was an insane fight weekend, top to bottom. The fight weekend recap, it starts now. Let's get right to it, though. I'm going to go with the very first portion. It will be the Munguia Bazinyan fight card. We had that on Friday night. That is what I wanted to address with you guys first. And so let's get right to it. Jaime Munguia, he's now become 44-1 after getting a KO in the 10th round against Erik Bazinyan, who's now 32-1-1. Now, this was originally a 12-round bout. This was going to be a premier fight to really solidify who's going to be a contender to possibly get an opening belt for Canelo whenever he decides to let go of some belts or possibly go for the one opening that they have available. Now, this was an interesting fight. Remember, this was the first fight for Munguia since his return this is the first fight since the Canelo Alvarez loss back in May. This was a very technical fight, and you could tell that there was a sense that Munguia was losing the early portion of the fight for the most part. Bazinyan seemed to be in control at the start, but as the fight progressed, Munguia got better and better, and he got to the standpoint where in the 10th round, he unleashed on him, got the KO. He pretty much destroyed him, beat him in real good there in the final 9-10 rounds there of the fight. Both guys did show great resilience, though. It was not an easy fight. A lot of hard hits. Both guys were taking big hits in that fight. Munguia was ultimately the one that prevailed in that showdown, though. That being said, though, both these guys that I alluded to were top guys in the 168 weight class. Both guys had the opportunity to really solidify themselves for another big-time fight. As I said, the Munguia was the one that prevailed. There was a list of guys I had presented and prepared for who I wanted to see Munguia fight next. But he's taking an interesting fight, though. He wants to stay active. He's going to fight December 14th in Tijuana, Mexico, and he's going to be fighting Ronald Gavril. Now, this is not a guy that's highly ranked. This is a guy that has caused problems for a lot of other guys in years recently. He's a guy that's underrated. He's a guy that's not going to be an easy fight. So it's a little bit surprising Munguia is taking this fight so shortly and instead of waiting out for a bigger fight. But Munguia is taking the challenge and will be fighting again this year, December 14th in Tijuana. What I do want to make clear, though, is that Munguia is a guy that I am very high on. We all have to realize and recognize that Canelo Alvarez is not going to be fighting forever. There's going to be a day when the king decides to move on and he decides to let go of some of his belts and he either moves on completely from boxing, goes to another weight class, whatever the case may be. When that day comes, we are seeing a lot of guys that are going to be the future of 168. Munguia is certainly solidified himself as a guy that a lot of people would probably say is a favorite to take over the reins there. He will be a champion once again one day. Edgar Berlanga is another guy that's in the mix there, as are other guys, but specifically I want to address Munguia right now. He is a guy that's entertaining to watch. He has a great fan base. He is extremely talented, resilient. He has a great ability. He's given, if you want to say, Canelo the biggest challenge, if you even want to say in the past couple of years, it would likely be Munguia. He did get a few wins or a few rounds, won against Canelo. Munguia is a guy that we're going to see around for a very, very long time. He's an incredible fighter, and he will be a world champion once again. Other people I want to address that was on that card, Richard Torrez Jr., he fought Joey in what was essentially a fight that I thought was going to be an easy guarantee. Pretty much just give Richard Torrez another fight. He moves to 11-0. He fought and got the DQ win on Joey, who decided that he could not keep his mouth guard in his mouth the entirety of the fight. It was annoying. He was getting beat up. It was going to be a KO anyways, but he just didn't want the KO against on his resume, so kept spitting out his mouthpiece. Very weird fight. Is what it is. Torres got the W, though. That's all that matters. He moves to 11-0, and he is only 25 years old. He is certainly one of the young prospects to keep an eye on at the heavyweight division. Then I want to discuss Emiliano Vargas. Moved to 12-0. He's only 20 years old. He just beat Larry Friars, and he KO'd him in round 5. He is another guy that, yes, people will say, well, he didn't fight anybody big. It's not a big name fighter. But guess what? Emiliano Vargas is a guy that we're going to see around for a very long time. He's a prospect for a reason. He's 20 years old. He's not going to be fighting the top guys yet. You're building yourself up, getting yourself ready to go take those next challenges, just as any other prospect is. And so for those that want to challenge whether or not he's good or not because it's early young process, it's pointless. He's 12-0. He's dominating in almost all of his wins. He's an incredible fighter, and he's certainly solidified himself as one of the premier young prospects in all of boxing. All right. That being said, that was Friday night. And as I said, it was a great transition because Friday night you had this card. And then just about 9 or 10 hours later, we were going to be able to get set for Riyadh season card, Wembley edition. And that's where the preview is going to be at now. Just to start off with how successful this event was, the Anthony Joshua vs. Daniel Dubois final attendance number was 98,128 at Wembley Stadium. New British boxing attendance record, biggest crowd the sport has ever seen in the country. On top of that, if I'm not mistaken, this also becomes a top 10 attended fight in boxing history. That is insane. And I'm going to just hint at this because I'm going to say this in a minute. I think if they were to do the rematch, you could get to 100. I'm just going to put that out there. What a successful event that was, though. Just from top to bottom, just to recognize and reflect on it real quickly, that event was sensational. The walkouts were insane, especially for the main event. Phenomenal. The card was successful. The fights were great. The fights were entertaining. There was not too many massive controversies. There were a couple little issues, but we'll address that. The fans, the atmosphere was sensational. The fights were great. Everything was so well put together. Just another successful Riyadh season card. That being said, let's address the main effects of the fight card is the fights themselves. So I want to get into that. I'm going to go from the first fight to the last fight, and that's how we're going to go in order of it, because I'm then going to transition into the heavyweight discussion following the AJ and Dubois breakdown. Let's get right to it now. The very first fight of the day, Mark Chamberlain, he fought Josh Padley, and this was one of the biggest upsets of the entire weekend. It was a massive upset where Josh Padley went in there as the extreme underdog. Chamberlain was a guy, as I said, was a fight or two away from a championship fight. He was a guy that has been rising up the rankings, solidified himself as a legitimate threat at the lightweight division. And Josh Padley comes and takes it away from him, moving Mark Chamberlain to 16-1 in his career. Josh Padley moves to 15-0, and he wins on points in that fight. Now, what I will say is this was not even a close fight. Josh Padley was in control the vast majority of that fight. And it was shocking. Mark Chamberlain was the favorite, as I said. Josh Padley was somewhat known, especially in the area, but he made his mark in that fight, solidified himself now as a player in the lightweight division. Massive game plan for Josh Padley, executed to perfection, and that was certainly an entertaining fight to watch this past weekend to kick off Riyadh season with one of the biggest upsets of the day. Next fight up was a big fight overall. It was Ishmael Davis. He had to fill in for Liam Smith, and he was fighting Josh Kelly. Ishmael Davis has now been moved to 13-1 after Josh Kelly defeated him. Josh Kelly moved to 16-1 and won. This was a light middleweight fight. This was interesting from one standpoint. Josh Kelly seemed to be in control the entirety of the fight. I'm not really sure at what point in time the judges viewed Ishmael Davis as being in the fight. Sure, give him a couple rounds, especially that 12th round. He obviously busted up Josh Kelly real good there in that final round. But outside of that, there was not a lot of success for Ishmael Davis in this fight. He ended up losing, thankfully, but the scorecards were surprisingly close. A lot closer than I thought they were. Josh Kelly seemed to be in position. And this is one thing I understand where the judges come from. A lot of judges, if a guy is fighting on his back foot and the other guy is moving forward, they automatically think the guy pushing forward is the guy in control and winning the fight. But that's not the case. If you watch the fight and you don't have that just direct mindset, that's all you're looking for, you recognize that it was all part of the game plan. Josh Kelly was in control of the fight, but for whatever reason, the judges feel differently. So that's what we got there. Josh Kelly made a good statement, got a great win overall there, especially in a tough situation where you were expecting to fight a massive fight, the biggest fight of his life in Liam Smith, and you end up getting to a situation where a week before the fight occurs, less than that, 6 days before that, he gets replaced with Ishmael Davis, and so you had to go out there and fight, and you still had a great performance. So what do I see next for Josh Kelly? I see a big domestic fight. The Liam Smith fight could still be on the table. That would be an entertaining one to see. Chris Eubanks Jr., Conor Benn. I think all three of those fights are ones that I'd like to see. Those three are all guys that's high up in the rankings. You can make a big domestic fight out there in the UK, in Britain, and that would be an interesting fight to see there. I think he's earned a chance at one of those guys as well. Let's head up to the next fight on the card. And I know that actually I switched around, but I got my notes set for this. So we'll address Joshua Buatsi versus Willy Hutchinson. This was for the WBO interim light heavyweight title. And Joshua Buatsi, he won 19-0, or he's now moved up his record to 19-0, and Willy Hutchinson is now 18-2. This was an interesting fight as well. It was a fight that was potentially one that I saw as could have been the fight of the night prior to the fight. Ended up not being as good as maybe originally expected, but still a great fight nonetheless, because Joshua Buatsi went out there, and I thought he was in great control the entire fight. But one card happened to have Willy Hutchinson winning it. Now, Hutchinson had a decent moments, you could maybe say, but Buatsi was firmly the winner of that fight, and he was certainly in control for the vast majority, but without a doubt the winner. So to have one judge favoriting Hutchinson was shocking to me. That was one of the biggest things I'd say was very controversial about the day. But regardless of that, we saw just a great performance overall, because Joshua Buatsi moves away from that as the WBO mandatory now for the Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol winner on October 12th. He had a great performance overall. Like I said, Willy Hutchinson built himself up. He got himself into a prime position to make a statement going forward. Willy Hutchinson has become a guy that a lot of people are fans of. I personally enjoy watching him. He's a great guy building up a fight. He's got an interesting style to watch. It was not his night. Joshua Buatsi was just better than him that night, and it is what it is. Buatsi, though, solidified himself as a legitimate threat in the light heavyweight division. He is the real deal. He proved himself once again, and that's why here's the list he's got. It's a very short list of guys that I'd like to see him fight next. The biggest one you have to have circled is fight for undisputed. Because when you have these guys that whoever's going to win the Bivol first better be a fight, October 12th, the biggest fight of the year, that one right there is somebody's going to have to fight them. There could be a rematch that occurs, potentially, who knows? You have Benavidez in the mix. You have Canelo could possibly go for it. If you have that chance for Buatsi, of course, you're going to go for undisputed. That's where I like to see him circle, and of course, it's going to be on his game plan number one. So I don't think he should make a game plan or idea for who to fight next until October 12th rolls around. Other options, if the undisputed is not on the table for himself, Anthony Yarde, David Morrell, or possibly, and I don't think this is one that I likely would see happen, but if Buatsi has a chance at Benavidez, that could be an entertaining fight. But mostly I'd say David Morrell, Anthony Yarde, both those guys would be guys that could possibly see him fight if undisputed is not on the table for him. Then for Willy Hutchinson, what's next for him? Well, as I said, he's still entertaining. Obviously, he got outclassed by Buatsi. Not really even a questionable statement there to make. But what's next for him? You could go Callum Smith, a guy that obviously has had a good career overall, but coming off a loss, is going to fight again, whatever the case may be. Would not mind seeing Callum Smith in that one. Dan Aziz, Lyndon Arthur, Malik Zanad. Remember, Malik Zanad had a great performance against Bivol. Overall, was surprising for what he's able to do on such short notice fight for his fight against Bivol on June 1st. That's another option. And then the one that I could see possibly, I'd say wait a little bit longer, maybe 6 months to 8 months, Ben Whitaker. The drunken master style fighter who's been up and coming. He's the guy that we're going to keep an eye on. He's fighting October 12th. That could be an interesting stylistic match. Willy Hutchinson is not quite fully in the drunken master style, but they have a lot of similarities that could result in an interesting fight. I think Willy Hutchinson would have the upper hand right now, which is why I say Ben Whitaker needs to fight well on October 12th. If Whitaker can also then go prevail and have another fight after that, then I could possibly see a matchup between Hutchinson and Whitaker at that point. But that's just one to keep an eye on because Whitaker is now ranked in the top 15 in a couple other different organizations. So that's what we got there for the Buatsi-Willy Hutchinson fight. Next up, I want to address Anthony Cacace. He beats Josh Warrington, and that was overall a solid fight. Technical fight, but a good fight overall. Cacace moves to 23-1, Warrington 31-4-1. Now, this was the fight that was a little bit of a problem from the standpoint that the IBF belt was supposed to be in the line. They pulled it from being on the line right before it happened. Bizarre situation there. Regardless if Cacace retains it, would have retained it either way. And he is still going to remain the IBF Super Featherweight World title holder. The one thing I do want to say right there is that Cacace obviously won it, a clear defeat there. He showed that he is legitimately a champion. He's a problem. But I want to emphasize this for Josh Warrington. Incredible overall career. He's given many, many great fights, been a part of big fights. And the final scene after that fight concluded, he left his gloves in the ring. For those that follow boxing are well aware that that means typically that that's going to be a retirement for that fighter. And if that is to be the case, then obviously congratulations on the incredible career to him. He had a great run, lots of great moments, but we'll see if he comes back or not. Obviously, he hasn't officially announced anything since that point in time. But I do want to say, since that's his future's kind of been already decided, if that is the case, he's going to retire. I'm only going to say what's next for Anthony Cacace. There's really only two options. One specifically I want to address for what Cacace should do. Lamont Roach. Unify the belts right there for super featherweight. That's got to be number one on his plan. Then you could go also to Eduardo Nunez. That could be a big fight as well. Because of the fact that he is a highly ranked guy, number one challenger, that would be something to keep an eye on as well. Those are really the only two guys. If you want to name somebody else, you could say Lee Wood is in the mix. Not as high about that. I really think his eyes should just be set on Lamont Roach, Eduardo Nunez. That's what I would circle for him. So we'll see what ends up unfolding with those guys. Last two, co-main event. Let's get right into it now. Hamzah, Sheeraz, Tyler Denny. That was a beatdown. The one I'm going to talk about, the main event, that was a beatdown too, but we're talking about getting a guy out of there in round two. He got him down in literally 10 seconds or whatever it was. That 7 seconds, he already knocked him down. It was literally demolition job from start to finish by Hamzah Sheeraz. He was a 21-0. Tyler Denny's 19-3 and 3 now in his career, and he now gets the European middleweight title. That was just, like I said, an absolute destruction job by Hamzah Sheeraz, and it wasn't what I was surprised to see at all. That's why I talked about on the preview. Hamzah Sheeraz is a guy that I view as a guy that will be a champion one day. He is a very, very good fighter, and when you look at what happened in that fight, Tyler Denny has had a good run. He's put in position to be ranked again. He is a solid fighter, but there is levels to this thing, and there was a massive gap there. Denny was going to be a massive underdog, and it showed there. So Sheeraz, now he wins the European middleweight title, and all I'm going to say is this. He deserves a championship fight. Hamzah Sheeraz is a guy that's going to be a champion in the future. I don't know if that's going to be this year or next year. He deserves a championship fight. He is going to be able to attain that, and I think he will be champion one day. He is a tough guy to fight. His length, his size, his talent, his power, how he's able to get all that down into his weight class of middleweight is sensational to me, is remarkable. He is going to be a guy to keep an eye on because he will be a champion in the future. Tyler Denny obviously had a great showing as well, but going forward, Hamzah Sheeraz is going to be a problem. He made that very, very clear. So what's next for Hamzah Sheeraz? Well, Janabek, that's an option on the table. Carlos Adames, that's an option on the table. Oris Landy, Laura, that's an option on the table. Those are the only three guys I consider if I'm Hamzah Sheeraz, the three champions right now that are available to fight. All three of those guys are guys that I think he has a chance at potentially defeating and dethroning and taking the belt from them. And those are three fights I'd like to see as well. So if I'm Hamzah Sheeraz, you already obviously have great ties with His Excellency. Make one of those fights happen. Go get them belts, and you start your great reign as a champion at the middleweight division. Now, let's get to the main event. Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois. That was one heck of a fight. And I've got a lot to say on this. It's going to be a little bit of a lengthy portion to this portion because there's a lot to reflect on and dissect from this fight. When we headed into this fight, Daniel Dubois was the underdog, significant underdog, might I say, to Anthony Joshua. However, everybody that knows and studied and prepared for this fight knew that this fight was not going to go the distance. I would have been shocked if it was going to even reach the second half of the rounds. AJ has been on an absolute tear of KOing guys. Daniel Dubois has been beating guys down and KOing them as well. This was not going to go the distance, regardless of how you looked at it. And when we got to this fight, that's exactly how it went down. Not who was expected to win, but the ultimate outcome is how it went down. And I wanted to say a lot of this because just to reflect on the fight to begin with, Dubois walks out, gets AJ rattled right at the gate, and from that point on, AJ is essentially damaged goods. He wasn't going to be recovered that well. He gets knocked down a couple more times, but what was interesting to me was that in round 5, he seemed to, I don't want to say recover because it wasn't as if he was good as new, but he seemed to have his feet settled a little bit better. He seemed to have a little bit grasp of where he was at, and it seemed to be getting going a little bit to the extent that he even hurt Dubois. Dubois was rattled. And the thing is that AJ wasn't fully back to himself where he was still working on defense, and he obviously went for a certain move, and then Dubois countered, and he ultimately laid the ending dent on AJ. That ends up being what occurs to end this fight and get Dubois, the IBF, officially submitted, fighting himself as the IBF heavyweight champion of the world. But there's a few points I want to say here, because all respect to Daniel Dubois. In no way am I going to take anything away from him because he had an absolute domination job on AJ. What I'm going to say right now, though, in regards to this fight, is the switch-up mentality that a lot of boxing fans do tend to have when we talk about fighting. I just said that before the fight, AJ was the favorite. If you look on Twitter for the most part, and the way people are talking, it's as if people are saying AJ hasn't been good since his Ruiz fight or since his last losses. Sure, has he been exactly the same? I don't know, but we were all in a full agreement that AJ was the favorite for that fight. Now, I won't say full, but majority was in agreement that AJ was the favorite for that fight. Most would have said that AJ looks great, and AJ has just had an incredible 18-month run. So the fact that people are out here now saying that AJ is damaged goods, that AJ was not himself, that AJ is not good anymore, that AJ was washed, and that fight hasn't been the same in many, many years, that's complete ludicrousy. That is not accurate at all, and that's a false statement. That's a stigma that's been going around boxing that I do not like at all. When we started having this idea that everyone's only as good as their last fight, and all of a sudden everything that's been done prior to that is irrelevant is nonsense. AJ did not have a trash run to get to this point. He was in position to get a belt and a world championship again because of what he just done. So we can't take that away from him, because ultimately all that's being done when we say that is that we're taking away from Dubois and what he just accomplished. AJ was AJ. He was perceived as either number 2 or 3 ranked heavyweight in the world, and he was fighting Dubois, who was an underdog. Do not take away anything from Dubois in this victory by saying AJ was washed or anything along those lines, because what AJ was he was a great fighter, and he was in a great position there, and he worked his way to get back into that place. And Dubois manhandled him in that fight. So all people are doing when they talk about this wash and all these different situations, you're only taking away from Dubois, and it's ultimately an inaccurate statement, because that's not what you were likely saying 4 or 5 days ago if we're talking last week. So that's just a stigma I wanted to make sure I clear up about this real quickly, because that's irritating to see and an inaccurate statement as well. The only thing I will say is that if you're looking at this and saying, okay, from a health standpoint, AJ just took a beating. Getting dropped supposedly 4 to 6 times, we don't know, just happening so rapidly, and then getting knocked out the way he did, that is going to do damage for anybody. That's one of the situations when we talk about the fact that boxing is not a sport. It's you don't play boxing, you do boxing. That's the definition of it, because boxing can take years off your life. It's proven. We know that. That's a situation, unfortunately. That's likely the results of what occurs in those scenarios. So if you're looking at this from a standpoint of saying age is older now, he's 34 years old, and he's already taken a couple beatings in his life. He's a physical fighter, and then this just occurred to him. If you're looking at saying, okay, he needs to retire because of what just happened to him, okay, that's different. I can agree with that. I see where you're coming from that standpoint. Sure. But if any other aspect you're talking about in regards to him being washed beforehand is inaccurate, and that's ridiculous. Because like I said, it's not only is it just inaccurate and not true about AJ, you're taking stuff away from Dubois. That being said, let's talk about Daniel Dubois. Because what Daniel Dubois just did is he just took out what was perceived as a number 2, number 3 ranked fighter in the world. I have a number 2 prior to the fight. Daniel Dubois, he is a fighter at 27 years old who is already a world champion at the heavyweight division. He has already fought on his resume Alexander Usyk, Anthony Joshua, Philip Hrgovic, Joe Joyce, Kevin Lerena, and Jarrell Miller. That's an incredible resume for a 27-year-old. At the heavyweight division, when typically your prime doesn't start necessarily until maybe 30 or so. Now that could be different and whatnot. But Daniel Dubois solidified himself as the future of the heavyweight division this past weekend. He made a statement. As a massive underdog, he walked into Wembley seeing as if that was his home. He had no problem whatsoever, was not shadowed, or not shaken, was not rattled to any degree, and he walked out there and made a statement in front of 98,000 people in Wembley, and he made himself solidified as a champion now, but a guy that should be a champion for a very, very long time. He is 27 years old, folks, and he just did what he did to Anthony Joshua. He's got a long time to reign. He's going to be a problem for a very, very long time. He has got lots of fights to possibly make. He's got a chance at undisputed. And like I said, 27 years old. He could be on a 10-year run potentially. That's not even out of the question when you talk about what he's capable of. He's still getting better and better as we talk. He is going to be a problem for a very, very long time, and he's going to be a guy that's going to be a threat in the heavyweight division for the next potentially decade. That is what we saw and learned about Daniel Dubois this weekend, and nobody can take anything away from him because that guy was all business. He made a mark on heavyweight both now and in history overall. That being said, I will say this. A couple other aspects before I get into this, because like I said, I'm going to transition this into the heavyweight division in a moment, but I want to make sure that we take a couple of different aspects to look at this, because this fight was incredible. Anybody that looks at this would say, okay, that's what you want in a heavyweight fight. Both guys came out swinging. Daniel Dubois legitimately jumped the gun right at the gate. There was no waiting around to test his power. There's no waiting around to take a couple of shots. Defense was very, very limited too, surprisingly by AJ. That's the one thing I will say. I was shocked by the limited amount of defense from AJ. We have gotten to know AJ as a guy that is one of the top, most powerful fighters in the heavyweight division, but also one of the most skilled guys in the heavyweight division. And the skills seem to really be limited in that fight. When you rewatch that and you see some of the hits that Dubois was hitting AJ with, they were maneuvers that AJ typically would not get hit with. And so it was shocking to see the lack thereof defense from AJ. But that's really the only component that I'd say really was interesting. And so why I also would say that I am intrigued in a potential rematch there to see if AJ could like to kind of switch up on some of those things and fix his weaknesses in that fight. But that fight was incredible from start to finish. Guys were swinging. AJ got dropped multiple times. Dubois got rocked. That was a heavyweight fight, a classic heavyweight fight that people will talk about for a very, very long time. The last thing I want to address about this fight is this. We need to give respect to AJ on his career. There's a lot of times that when we look at guys, you might have been a fan of him, you might not have been a fan of him, but when greatness is present, you have to show respect. AJ has become not just an icon in Britain and the UK, he's become a worldwide icon. One that you could easily say has been the face of boxing now. And you could look at that by numbers. The face of boxing does not always mean you are the best boxer. It means that you are recognized around the world. You're a global icon. When people think of boxing, people, regardless of whether you follow boxing or not, think of you. You are the definition of pay-per-view. And let's look at these numbers now. After this weekend, just alone in the stadium fights in which AJ has been a part of, he has now sold 490,000 stadium tickets. That number is insane. Almost 500,000 stadium tickets have been sold by Anthony Joshua throughout his career. He has set the record now this weekend of 98,000 plus in attendance. He has sold out Wembley Stadium. He sold out anywhere you place him at, he sells out. That is what Anthony Joshua has brought to the table in terms of his audience. But then we look deeper into that, and it's not just about the audience that you evaluate, because what Anthony Joshua also does is he's got that audience because of what he's built as a fighter. Anthony Joshua has had an incredible run. He's been a champion twice. He's been a guy that's been able to accomplish tremendous success in his career, and he's one of the great stories in boxing. He talks about it all the time. This was not supposed to be his life. Anthony Joshua was not supposed to go out and be a great boxer. He was in trouble with the law. He was getting arrested when he was only 20 years old. He didn't start boxing until he was 20. And he's now gone on to become one of the greatest icons of this generation in boxing, period. He's become the guy that has revolutionized British boxing. He's become one of the most successful fighters there's ever been, all since starting at the age of 20. He's also carried himself at an extremely high level and been a reflection of a great role model. That is the guy that people should be able to respect. And so he's already announced he's not going to retire. So we're going to see AJ again in the ring at some point. But I think we need to make sure we show respect and understand just what he's brought to boxing and how much he's revolutionized boxing as a whole. So that's what I've got for you guys in regards to a recap of this past weekend's fight cards. That being said, I do want to transition this because I did not say who I thought Daniel Dubois and AJ should fight next, because I got a special segment coming up next. Or actually, before we do that, let me actually cut that back real quick. I do want to say one other thing about Riyadh season card. I have my big winners for you guys from the Riyadh season cards this past weekend. From both the Munguia and Bazinyan fight card and the Riyadh season card Wembley edition. Here's my 5 biggest winners of the weekend. At number 5, Hamzah Sheeraz. Wasn't the most talented fighter he fought, but he made a statement. Second round KO, made his mark, solidified himself as a future champion, in my opinion. I have number 5 biggest statements made this weekend. Number 4, Joshua Buatsi. He came in with a statement made as well, getting the win on Willy Hutchinson. Didn't get the KO, but showed his dominance and solidified himself as one of the top contenders in the light heavyweight division. At number 3, Josh Padley was the biggest upset. Maybe I'd say the biggest upset of the weekend. He goes in as a guy that nobody thought had a chance at winning, and he dethrones Mark Chamberlain, a guy that was a potential future champion, and he makes a massive statement in that win. At number 2, Jaime Munguia gets a 10th round KO on Erik Bazinyan, who was also a fellow top 10 ranked fighter, and he solidified himself as a guy that's going to be a contender, and in my opinion, a future champion once again at 168. And the biggest winner of the weekend is Daniel Dubois. Not much question there. He could easily say he was the biggest upset of the weekend in his defeat of Anthony Joshua. He got himself an IBF Heavyweight Championship of the world. He is a guy that is at 27 years old and made one of the biggest statements you could ask for this weekend. He solidified himself as both a current champion, but a champion for many years to come. So that is my top 5 winners of this past weekend's fights.